Hello and welcome to this Politics UK exclusive interview with Dr. Mike Galsworthy. I'm Bill Curtis. Now, Dr. Galsworthy has took on Nigel Farage in debates, and he's been endorsed by the likes of Sean Berry from the Green Party, who was on the show last week, and he's told us that he won't let politicians be silent on Brexit. And Brexit, as you know, was the main talking point of the 2019 campaign, although it hasn't come up that much in this election, and he tells us why he thinks that is and why parties are trying to avoid the topic, especially the Labour and Conservative Party. Make sure you give it a listen, and you can always also rate us 5 stars on Apple, iTunes and Spotify. I first asked Mike to tell us a bit about his role within the European movement and how he got involved in the first place.
Okay, my name is Mike Galsworthy. I'm a scientist by background. I did my PhD in genetics and behaviour, so human behaviour and animal behaviour. But then in 2015, I was involved in science policy. I've been analysing the EU science programmes. I was in the exec of Scientists for Labour, writing their science policy. But David Cameron won with a promise that there would be a referendum on our membership of the EU. So I quickly put together a new campaign called Scientists for EU. That took off. We were making the argument that leaving the EU would be disastrous for UK science, as it has been. And I was pretty much into political campaigning from then on in, because after 2016, we were still campaigning on the importance of rebuilding with regard to science, but then everything got drawn into the People's Vote campaign, which was, well, come up with whatever Brexit solution you like, but at least get the public stamp of approval on it. And then after 2019, I was got pulled back into European Movement UK, first as a strategic advisor in 2022, but then when the chair of European Movement UK, Andrew Adonis, stepped down at the end of 2022, people encouraged me to put my name forward as chair, and there was an election, and I got the majority of votes, and so I've been the chair of European Movement UK since March 2023.
The European movement hasn't just come around because of the Brexit referendum. It was founded over 75 years ago internationally by Winston Churchill, wasn't it?
Winston Churchill was one of the founders of European Movement, which is now European Movement International, and that was in 1948. The next year, I think it was called the British Chamber of the European Movement or something similar to that, but it's now European Movement UK, was formed. And so European Movement has actually developed organisations in Ireland, in France, Spain, and Germany, right across Europe. But the UK one was established in February 1949, and it was cross-party in origin. There were leading parliamentary figures from all the main parties back at that time, and it stayed cross-party since, as the characters in it had a leading hand in writing the first draft of the European Convention on Human Rights, which contained the European Court on Human Rights. They campaigned for us to enter the common market, and then campaigned in the referendum of 1975 to stay in the single market. And so European movement has been a big political institution all of this time until about the 90s, where Tony Blair's efforts to set up his own pro-European campaign actually sucked a lot of energy from European Movement UK, and then by the time we got into the referendum, European Movement UK had to keep its head down because David Cameron wanted to lead the charge on that. After he failed, it was European Movement UK that essentially assembled all of the local grassroots groups together and took care of the grassroots and local groups in the People's Vote campaign, where Open Britain sort of did the media end of things. And then since 2019, it's just been European movement which has been the surviving entity, as is its wont. It's our 75th year this year, and it's really picking up a lot of membership now. So over 22,000 members, supporting well over 100 local groups. Also, there's European movement in Scotland, Wales for Europe and Young European Movement, whose members are also part of European Movement UK and European Movement UK. Put staff in all of them, as in pays for staff to be in all of them to help them function. Overall, European Movement UK has about 20 staff, and our president currently is Michael Heseltine, and I am the chair, and our CEO is Nick Harvey, a previous CEO of the Liberal Democrats.
That's really interesting, and how it also goes from an international standpoint to a UK standpoint, and going to the local grassroots campaigns with over 100 local groups, like you said there. You've also got over 200,000.
Yeah, so it's real communities at different levels, which is the interesting thing. We've got a lot of local community on the ground, and then at the UK level, we've got Wales for Europe and European Movement in Scotland and Young European Movement, and it's thoroughly cross-party. And then on the international level, again, it's a community of European movements. So community and community building is really at the heart of it all.
Yeah, and how difficult is it to organise from a local standpoint right up to a world standpoint, basically, to do with the European movement? Is it hard to relay messages across, or do you not find that is the case?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it keeps me busy because it's always about engaging with people, diplomacy, having conversations, making sure the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. There's tons and tons of that. And if you don't do that in an organisation, if people don't feel included and people don't feel connected, then you have the splits, then you have the schisms. So for me, it's absolutely vital that we do have that harmony all across the board, but it takes a lot of time and it keeps you very busy making sure that you're in touch with everyone and everyone feels in touch with you.
And do the European movement in the UK work with the government and work with different organisations and charities on specific policies?
Well, the government of now isn't very friendly towards us. We're hoping that the next government will be more friendly. In terms of pro-European campaigning, though, it's a whole ecosystem of different organisations, whether they be fellow campaigners or whether they be in polling or media or think tank organisations. There's just a very big ecosystem of people who we work with. So that's a level of community as well.
You've just mentioned the next government there, and as you know, there's going to be an election on the 4th of July. I was speaking to a parliamentary candidate in Manchester today who said that Brexit hasn't come up because people are fed up of talking about it. Would you agree?
I think people are fed up of talking about Brexit in the past and being pulled back to the past and the arguments of the past. However, people do want to talk about Europe and the opportunities with Europe for youth, for business, for trade, in terms of climate change, in terms of our security. So oftentimes with polling questions, it's about how you phrase it. So he is absolutely right, because we've done our own research as well, and we know that people don't want to get stuck in the perennial argumentations that were happening from 2016 to 2019. But we also know, when we went out and polled people, do you think our relationship with Europe is an important topic for this general election? 58% said yes. And that goes up into the 60s for the younger generations. So people do want to talk about Europe. They do want to talk about all the granular bits and pieces that Brexit has trashed, but they don't want to go back to the argument style of what's gone on in the past. So it's very, very important to focus on, right, what can we build that's positive? Where can we go from here that picks up pieces and rebuilds and open doors and does good things and has future-focused stories? That's where people want the engagement on the topic.
Do you accept that there isn't a time coming up that we're going to be rejoining the EU?
I think there is a time coming up that we're going to be rejoining the EU. Absolutely. And the mission of European Movement UK has always been about building Europe, protecting Europe, rights in Europe. But at the moment, one of the major missions is, of course, us getting this country back into full membership of the European Union. We recognise that it's not likely to happen in the next Parliament, is it? I mean, we've got a lot of house tidying to do, and the EU is also going to be looking at us and thinking, you're not ready to come back in, because you don't have the full alignment of your public on a stable. 65% at least want to rejoin. You don't have all your parties aligned on it. You haven't gone through the basic steps you need to go through in order to get back in. So it's not going to happen in the next Parliament, but ask yourself this. Let's say Labour get in now and they build back a bit with Europe, staying outside the red lines, knowing that those red lines stop them from getting into the single market and all the business opportunities and the inward investment that comes with that. What's the Labour Party going to be offering to the electorate 5 years from now? If it's not going to be something that reflects the public at large, which is very pro-rejoin, and reflects the business community, which absolutely wants back in the single market and customs union, what are they going to be offering? Because if it stops short of that, I think they could be in trouble at that time.
So this isn't the general election that we should be talking heavily about Brexit, or rejoining the EU rather.
I think we should be talking about Brexit because I think we've had enough years of Brexit now to know that there are no substantial benefits to it whatsoever. But that hasn't been accounted for. That should be accounted for. We should analyse it. It's no good just saying, oh, we might have made a bit of a mistake there, looking down at your feet and saying, but let's not talk about it. If we actually have an interest in this country, we need to be open and clear about what's the damage that's been done, how can you undo it, what's a better place for our country to be in. And because the world changes as well, and it's changed around us, look at Russia and China, and look at what's happening in the States. Where we are at the moment is not a geopolitically sensible position. You may have been able to try and argue for it back in 2016, but the geopolitical dynamics have shifted such that it's really not a tenable place to be in. And so that conversation does need to start happening now, and this election is a good time for it. Should people feel bold enough to actually talk about what underpins so much of our economics, what underpins so much of our security, what underpins so much of our youth opportunities and our need to address common problems like climate change.
And you mentioned there about security and global security. And I know some of the listeners listening in right now would say we have NATO for that. What do you say to them?
Well, NATO's not in a great shape right now, is it? Particularly if Donald Trump were to come in, then we already know that he is extremely skeptical about NATO. I think regardless of the President of the United States sat in the White House, it's becoming clearer and clearer that Europe as a whole needs to wake up, smell the coffee, down the coffee, and get on to actually thinking about its own security. We cannot, with threats that we're facing at the moment, just rely on the United States. You see that so clearly with Ukraine. You see that their future and ours are sort of bundled together with this threat. And so just saying, oh, NATO will provide is absolutely no solution whatsoever. We do need, as David Lammy has been saying, a security framework with the EU. And that security framework is not just the hard power to resist a very dangerous Russia, but it also goes into the cyber security. It goes into the threats of what climate change could bring and everything else from a disruptive world around us. So NATO's served us well for a while, but if you're looking at the current threats afresh, Europe as a whole, and that's us included, need to step up to the plate with new solutions.
So would you be wanting to rejoin the European Union, but maybe changing our agreements with NATO?
No, I don't think you need to disrupt NATO per se. I mean, you've just got new European members come into NATO recently, but you need to make sure that the European half of NATO, if you will, is a much better functioning entity that could even be freestanding if need be.
You alluded to the point before about how you think Labour will form the next government as the polls are predicting. So is Labour and is the Labour leadership specifically going far enough to join and have relations with the European Union and countries in the European Union again?
So we know that the Labour Party have set down some red lines. They want to rebuild with Europe, but they've got red lines and they don't want to pass those. And one of the major reasons is that they had these red lines when Liz Truss gave them the gift of a massive poll margin, and they decided at that point that they had been handed a Ming vase that they needed to carry safely across the ice rink with no sudden moves in order to actually get the gift that Liz Truss had provided them. They weren't planning on being in this position, back at the end of 2022. They didn't think they'd go into 2023 thinking, well, we could be in power next year. So essentially, they have been uber cautious on the topic of Europe because they have not wanted to, coming back to the original point, get sucked back into fighting about Brexit and the rights and wrongs of it, or give the Conservative parties opportunities to cry betrayal or spook the base that did actually vote for Brexit and now maybe regret it a bit but don't want to talk about it. So they've been really, really cautious on that front, and their responsibility, as far as they can see, is to actually win back a lot of their base and deliver the biggest win that they can in the general election. And that is their responsibility, and they will research how best to do that, and that's their decision. However, should they get into government, then their responsibilities change overnight. Their responsibilities are no longer to just say what is needed in order to win at a general election. Their responsibilities are to the country in terms of what the public wants, what the businesses of the country want and need, how to fix the economy, and how to take care of everything responsibly. And they know that they need more money in the kitty, and they know that they need more growth, and they know that they need more inward investment. And so in order to get all of that, they do have to look at their relationship with Europe. They know this. But they've got their red lines set down, and of course we would push hard against them. But they will move closer to Europe, and the big question is, will they start leaning over their red lines? So with our manifesto for Europe, we didn't want to say, listen, you've got it wrong. You should be making a plan to rejoin as soon as you come in, and that should be your priority, because they've got a lot of house tidying to do. But we are setting out things that surely they and lots of other candidates can agree with, which is an improved close relationship with Europe, stopping the erosion of standards and rights that's associated with Brexit, and various ways in which they can cooperate with Europe in programs of youth mobility, in terms of working closer on medicines, aviation, chemicals, food standards, data AI, and others. So get close, work together, but then also we make the ask that you assess the impact of Brexit. We know that, of course, the Conservative Party have not wanted to do this for very obvious reasons, but a new government coming in with a fresh mandate that has to basically get out the clipboard and say, right, what have we got in the House, where are we, should really, really commission an independent state-of-the-nation assessment of the impact that Brexit is having on the economy and also key cultural and societal sectors. You've got to make your forward plans based on knowledge.
I'm just conscious of time, so if you had one or two sentences to say to Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, right now, what would you ask him to do surrounding the European movement?
I would ask him to look to what the public wants, be bold, and make the case for the UK and Europe working together, singing up the concepts of mutual interests and mutual investments, and everything else logically flows from there.
And same question or same statement to Rishi Sunak, what he may not be the leader or the Prime Minister after the next general election, but what would you ask him to do?
If he were re-elected as Prime Minister, I would say it's a new parliament. The country is in a mess, but you have a new complexion in Parliament. You've got new needs of the country. If you want to move this country forward, you have to look at UK-EU partnerships. Otherwise, we will stay stuck in the briar patch longer, and that's not good for the country's interests.
Well, thank you for coming on, and just a quick final question before you go. If you think Labour are going to win the next general election, how much do you think they'll win by?
It's actually really hard to know. I think most people are thinking that it's going to be a substantial victory. A lot comes down to how much the Reform Party as well can chip off the Conservatives. But most people are estimating that the Conservatives will be between 70 and 140 seats, something in that range. But with so many fine margins that could fall like dominoes everywhere, it's really, really hard to judge. And we've still got a couple of weeks to go in which mistakes can be made and dramatic things can happen.
Well, thank you for coming on, Mike.
Okay, thanks very much.
That was Dr. Mike Galsworthy there, talking exclusively to Politics UK about this year's general election and what Brexit has to do with it. We mentioned at the start of the episode that Brexit was the main talking point of the 2019 campaign, and arguably it hasn't come up once. And the European movement, and Mike there has just called upon Sir Keir Starmer to be bold and make the case for the UK and Europe to work together. And if you haven't already, make sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple iTunes and give us a 5-star rating while you're at it. And of course, if you haven't already followed us on X, make sure you do that at Politics UK.